I was standing there in the middle of that crappy motel room watching Gabriella's grandmother's rosary beads scatter across the dirty floor like silver tears when I felt the old woman's heart beating inside my chest. It wasn't a metaphor, it wasn't imagination. I actually felt her pulse echoing in my body as if she were alive and breathing through me. At that moment, looking at her reflection in the room's fogged-up mirror, I understood that I had broken much more than a religious object. I had broken a sacred connection I didn't even know existed, and now she was trying to show me something that would change my life forever. But let me back up, because to understand what happened that night, you need to know who I was before. My name is Rick, I'm 32, and until that moment I was one of those guys who thought he had all the answers. I worked as a salesman at an electronics store, lived alone in a small apartment, and was absolutely certain that God was just an invention to comfort the weak. Religion to me was for people who couldn't face the harsh realities of life. Gabriella was my friend since high school. A sweet girl, an only child who had been raised by her grandmother after her parents died in an accident when she was only 8 years old. Grandma Mary, as I knew her, was one of those old-fashioned ladies, the kind who said the rosary every day, blessed people with rue sprigs, believed in miracles and divine protection. She was always kind to me, even knowing my views on religion. When she saw me at their house, she would smile and say, "One day you'll understand, son, God isn't in a hurry." Gabriella had inherited her grandmother's faith like inheriting eye color. It was natural to her, part of her personality. The rosary that Grandma Mary had left behind when she passed away, about 2 years ago, was her most precious possession. An antique rosary with mother-of-pearl beads and a silver crucifix worn smooth by time and prayers. Gabriella always carried it in her purse, touched it when she was nervous, prayed with it when she needed comfort. I used to tease her about it, calling the rosary her lucky charm, just to provoke her. She'd laugh, but I could see it bothered her. That Friday in September, Gabriella had received a job offer in a city 120 miles away. It was a great opportunity, but she needed to be there Saturday morning for a final interview. The problem was that her car had broken down, and she asked me to take her. I agreed immediately. I always enjoyed driving at night, and I thought it would be nice to take a trip with her. We left around 10 o'clock at night. The car was my old beat-up 2008 Corsa that made a strange noise going uphill, but it had never let me down. The sky was heavy, laden with dark clouds that seemed to be following us. Gabriella was nervous about the interview, fidgeting with the rosary the whole time, murmuring prayers under her breath. The radio picked up more static than music, so we spent most of the trip in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Around midnight, when we were on one of those winding back roads, it started to rain. It wasn't a normal rain, it was thick, heavy drops, hitting the windshield like small stones. Visibility became terrible, and I started to worry. The Corsa didn't have the best tires, and driving in that rain, on that dark road, was getting dangerous. That's when we saw the motel. One of those roadside places, straight out of a horror movie, a worn-down facade, a flickering neon sign with half the bulbs burnt out, a gravel parking lot with puddles reflecting the yellowish light of the lampposts. "Let's stop here," I said. "We'll wait for the rain to pass, and then continue our journey." Gabriella hesitated. "I don't know, Rick, this place gives me the creeps," but the rain was getting heavier, so she agreed. The receptionist was a thin man, about 50 years old, with the look of someone who had seen a lot in life. He gave us the key to the cheapest room, number 13, ironically. The room smelled of mildew and cheap cleaning product. It had 2 single beds, an old particle board dresser, a tiny TV, and a mirror that hadn't been cleaned properly in months. The window overlooked the dark parking lot, and you could hear the rain beating on the roof like distant drums. Gabriella sat on one of the beds and took the rosary out of her purse. She started to pray, softly, asking for protection for the trip and for the interview the next day. I was irritated, I don't know why. Maybe it was the tiredness, maybe it was that depressing atmosphere, maybe it was seeing her clinging to those prayers as if they were a lifeline. "Do you really think this works?" I asked, pointing to the rosary. "Do you really think whispering to some mother-of-pearl beads is going to change anything. She looked at me with those brown eyes hurt. Rick, please, you know this is important to me. But something inside me couldn't stop. It was as if all the frustration of life, all the anger I felt against the injustice of the world, against the pain that good people feel, against the feeling of being lost in a meaningless existence, had concentrated in that moment on that small and seemingly harmless object. Important, I laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. Gabriella, your grandmother prayed her whole life and still lost her parents. You pray every day, and yet you're constantly struggling, working a job you hate, living in that tiny apartment. Where's the protection? Where are the miracles? The words poured out of me like venom, and I saw each one hurt her, but I couldn't stop. Gabriella was silent for a moment, clutching her rosary to her chest. Then she stood, went to her purse, and put the rosary inside. As she turned, her purse fell to the floor. The rosary rolled out and landed in a dark corner, between a dirty ashtray and the base of a fogged-up mirror. We both stared at it, dimly gleaming in the yellowish light of the crooked lamp. And that's when I did the stupidest thing of my life. I picked up the rosary, and in a fit of anger and contempt, tossed it into the trash can next to the bed. There, I said. Now you can see how the world really works. No tricks, no illusions, no false hope. The instant the rosary disappeared into the plastic trash bag, Gabriella burst into laughter. But it wasn't normal laughter. It was hysterical, uncontrolled, seeming to come from a very deep, dark place within her. I laughed at Our Lady, she said, between gasps, but the laughter had a panicked edge, as if she couldn't stop. The sound echoed in the room strangely, as if the walls absorbed the laughter and returned it distorted, amplified. I stood there, watching her laugh like that, and felt a chill run down my spine. There was something wrong with that laughter, something I couldn't explain. Gabriella herself seemed frightened by what was coming out of her mouth, but she couldn't stop. It was as if something had taken possession of her, using her voice to express a mockery she would never feel. A few minutes later, when she finally regained control, a heavy silence fell over the room. That's when I started to hear it, a whisper, so low it sounded like the rustling of a long dress on the carpet. Gabriella heard it too, because I saw her tremble and press herself against the wall, looking over my shoulder as if someone were behind me. The radio, which had been silent since we arrived, began to crackle. For a moment, it picked up something, a faint but audible female voice, murmuring, "Why the rosary?" The voice held a tone of supplication, pain, incomprehension. Gabriella and I exchanged glances, and I saw the same terror in her face that I was feeling. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, her eyes wide. I tried to fiddle with the radio, change the station, but the device fell silent again. But now the silence was different. It was a silence that seemed to be waiting for something, watching, judging. That's when Gabriella's purse fell again. She was on the bed, far from her purse, and there was no draft in the closed room. The purse simply fell, and when we looked, the rosary was there, on the bedspread, gleaming in the yellowish light, as if it had never left. The beads seemed brighter, the crucifix sharper, more present. I began to say, but couldn't finish the sentence. Gabriella slowly approached the bed, reached out to pick up the rosary, but recoiled, as if she'd received a shock. I tried to pick it up myself, but felt the same thing, a physical revulsion, as if something invisible pushed me away. The shadows on the wall began to move. They weren't normal shadows, created by the lamplight. They were shapes that contorted, taking on almost human aspects, long arms, bowed heads, silhouettes moving in rhythm with our racing heartbeats. Every time we tried to approach the rosary, the shadows became more agitated, more defined. Gabriella finally managed to grasp the rosary, and the moment her hands touched the beads, something happened. She closed her eyes and began to tremble, as if she were seeing something I couldn't see. Tears streamed down her face, and she murmured, "Grandma, Grandma, forgive me." I approached and, when I looked in the fogged-up mirror of the room, almost fell backward. There was a female figure there, reflected behind us, an old woman in a white veil, silver hair, wet and sad eyes. She looked directly at Gabriella, then at me, and in her eyes I saw a mixture of pain and disappointment that cut me like a blade. "Grandma Mary," Gabriella whispered, her eyes still closed. The figure in the mirror nodded slightly, raised a wrinkled hand, and pointed to the rosary, then to both of us. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, I wanted to wake up from this nightmare, but my feet were glued to the floor. The atmosphere of the room became denser, heavier. Time seemed to waver. Sometimes I felt like we had been there for hours, sometimes as if everything had started just seconds ago. In the mirror, the image of Grandma Mary became clearer, more present. She moved her lips, as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving stories like this, because what happened next completely changed my view on life, on faith, on things we can't explain with reason. Gabriella opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Rick," she said, "she's trying to show us something. Grandma Mary, she's not angry, she's sad." And truly, looking at the figure in the mirror, I could see that it wasn't anger she felt. It was a deep sadness, a motherly disappointment, as if we'd broken something far more valuable than we'd realized. "What do we do?" I asked, and my voice came out hoarse, unrecognizable. Gabriella held the rosary more firmly. I think we have to fix what's broken, not the physical rosary, but the respect, the connection." At that moment, I understood I wasn't just dealing with superstition or imagination. Something real was happening there, something my rational mind couldn't process, but my heart was beginning to accept. Grandma Mary's presence was palpable, as real as the air I breathed. Gabriella began to pray. It wasn't the rote prayer I was used to hearing, but something that came from the depths of her soul. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." Her voice trembled, but there was a sincerity there I'd never noticed before. And as she prayed, the figure in the mirror seemed to become calmer, more serene. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know the prayers. I had no faith. I didn't believe in any of this until a few minutes ago. But looking at that woman in the mirror, seeing the pain in her eyes, feeling the weight of my irreverence, something inside me began to crack. I could no longer sustain my arrogance, my absolute certainty that I was right and the rest of the world was wrong. "I'm sorry," I whispered, looking at the mirror. "I'm sorry, Grandma Mary. I didn't know, I didn't understand." The words came out with difficulty, as if they'd been trapped in my throat for years. It was the first time in my adult life that I'd apologized for questioning someone's faith, that I'd acknowledged that there might be things beyond my comprehension. The woman in the mirror smiled. It was a sad smile, but full of understanding and forgiveness. She raised her hand again, this time not pointing, but blessing, and in that gesture, I felt a peace I'd never experienced before. It wasn't relief, it was something deeper, a feeling that I was being accepted, despite all my mistakes, despite all my arrogance. Gabriella continued praying, and her voice was getting stronger, more confident. The shadows on the wall began to dissipate, losing their human form, and transforming into gray vapors that faded into the air. The tension in the room was lessening, but something still needed to be resolved. That's when I understood what I needed to do. "Gabriella," I said, "I think we need to break the rosary." She looked at me as if I'd gone mad. "Break it? But Rick, it's Grandma's rosary." "Exactly," I replied, "and that's why. It's not the object that matters, it's what it represents. Grandma isn't trapped in the rosary, she's trapped in our guilt, in our lack of understanding. If we break the rosary, she'll understand that it's not the physical object we venerate, but the memory, the love, the spiritual connection." Gabriella hesitated, but she looked at the mirror and saw the approval in her grandmother's eyes. Together, we took the rosary, and released the clasp. The beads scattered on the floor with a musical sound, like tiny bells playing a melancholic melody. Each bead that fell seemed to release a sigh, a relief, as if something that had been trapped for a long time could finally depart in peace. The room was completely silent for a moment. Then, we began to hear a different sound, the beating of a heart. It wasn't ours, it was a slower, more serene beat, almost maternal. It was Grandma Mary's heart, beating in farewell, in forgiveness, in unconditional love. We looked at the mirror one last time, and she was there, clearer than ever. She raised her hand, waved slightly to Gabriella, then to me, and smiled a full smile of someone who could finally rest. Her last words, which I heard not with my ears but with my heart, were, "Faith isn't in the object, my son. It's in the love." And then she dissolved like smoke, taking with her all the tension, all the fear, all the guilt that had hung over us that night. The room returned to normal, the wind against the window, the silent radio, the smell of mildew and cheap cleaning product. But we weren't the same anymore. Gabriella knelt down and began to gather the scattered beads. Each one she picked up, she held with affection, as if it were a small blessing. I helped her, and as we collected the beads, I felt that I was also collecting pieces of a new understanding about life, about faith, about the respect we should have for the beliefs of others. "Will you put the rosary back together?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I think it's served its purpose. I'll keep the beads in a little box, as memories of Grandma. But the rosary itself, I don't think it needs to exist as an object anymore. It already exists here," she said, touching her heart. We stayed up the rest of the night, talking. Gabriella told me stories about her grandmother that I'd never heard, small miracles, subtle signs, moments of faith that had sustained the family during difficult years. For the first time, I listened without judging, without questioning, just absorbing the beauty of those experiences. When dawn broke, the rain had stopped. We left the motel in silence, each processing what had happened. The drive to the city, where Gabriella would have her interview, was peaceful, with the radio playing soft music and the rising sun painting the road gold. Gabriella landed the job. Afterward, she said she'd never felt so confident in an interview, so sure of herself. "It was like Grandma was there with me," she explained, and I believed her. As for me, I can't say I became religious overnight. I didn't start attending church. I didn't learn to pray the rosary. I didn't have a dramatic conversion, but something fundamental shifted in my worldview. I learned that people's faith isn't something to be ridiculed or dismissed. I learned that there are mysteries in life that our rational minds can't explain, and that doesn't make them any less real or less important. I learned, above all, that love doesn't die with the body. Grandma Mary that night taught me that the people we love remain with us in ways we can't fully comprehend, but that we can feel when we open our hearts to the possibility. Today, when I see someone praying, when I see someone clinging to faith during difficult times, I feel a deep respect, because I understood that faith isn't weakness, it's courage. It's the courage to believe in love, even when everything seems lost. It's the courage to maintain hope, even when reality is harsh. It's the courage to trust that there's a greater purpose, even when we can't see it. Grandma Mary's rosary wasn't just a religious object. It was a symbol of decades of love, of prayers whispered on difficult nights, of hope cultivated in moments of despair, of faith maintained even when everything seemed to go wrong. When I threw that rosary in the trash, I wasn't just discarding mother-of-pearl beads. I was discarding the history of a lifetime of devotion and love. But Grandma Mary, even from the other side, taught me that forgiveness is possible, that understanding can be born from one's own pain, that respect can emerge from irreverence. She didn't come to punish me for my arrogance. She came to teach me, to show me that there's room for everyone in this world, believers and non-believers, as long as there's mutual respect and genuine love. Sometimes, at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I feel a gentle maternal presence that reminds me to be grateful for the lessons learned. It's not fear, it's comfort. It's the certainty that even in my darkest moments, there's a light that accompanies me, an ancestral wisdom that guides me, a love that transcends life and death. Gabriella and I became even closer after that night. There's a complicity between us now, a mutual understanding that we experience something extraordinary, something that changed us forever. She keeps the rosary beads in a small wooden box, and sometimes, when we're together, she takes one or two and holds them, as if she's silently conversing with her grandmother. I learned that I don't need to believe in everything to respect everything. I don't need to share someone's faith to honor that faith. I don't need to fully understand the mysteries of life to accept that they exist and that they are part of the human experience. Grandma Mary taught me that humility is the beginning of wisdom, that recognizing our limitations isn't a sign of weakness, but of maturity, that there's room in this world for mystery, for the inexplicable, for that which touches our hearts, even when our minds can't comprehend it. And so, on that rainy dawn, in a roadside motel, amidst dancing shadows and impossible reflections, I learned one of the most important lessons of my life, that true love knows no boundaries, recognizes no barrier, isn't limited by the narrow concepts we create in our minds. Love transcends, persists, teaches, and forgives, even when we don't deserve it. Today, when I pass a church and hear the sound of prayers, I smile. When I see an elderly lady holding a rosary, I feel tenderness. When someone talks to me about faith, I listen with respect, because I've learned that each person carries with them a sacred story, a unique journey of searching for meaning, for connection, for love. Grandma Mary didn't need to appear to me that night. She had already fulfilled her mission here on earth. She had already planted her seeds of faith in the heart of the granddaughter she loved. But she chose to come. She chose to teach me. She chose to transform my arrogance into humility, my disbelief into respect, my coldness into gratitude. And so, whenever I tell this story, I end with the words I heard from her that night. Faith isn't in the object, my son, it's in the love. Words I carry with me as a gift, as a blessing, as a constant reminder that there's always more to life than our eyes can see, more than our minds can comprehend, more than our hearts, however large, can contain. This is my story. This is my gratitude. This is my testimony that true love is eternal, and that sometimes, when we least expect it, it returns to remind us of who we truly are and who we can become.